Okay, so in this, just before we start, we're going to go through a numerical example. It's going to be different than the one we did already of costs. So we're going to talk about, so remember we have two kinds of costs, fixed costs and variable costs. And so we're going to do just a numerical example of this idea. And remember, fixed cost is things that in the short run, they don't change quantity in the short run. So if you produce more, produce less, those don't change. And these change with quantity in the short run. So these, if you have a higher quantity, they're going to be higher. And if you have a lower quantity, they're going to be lower. Okay, so for our simple example, you can think of fixed costs just to be something like rent. And you can think of variable costs to be labor and resources, for example. Okay, so so there's two questions we want to ask ourselves. And these are two questions that we have to think of. We have to define a concept for them. So the first question is, how much does it cost to make a typical pizza? And so we're going to do pizza, for example. We're going to use different numbers than we did before, but we're going to use this idea. And so this is just going to be this is going to be an average. Okay, so the typical pizza. So we make 100 pizzas, and how much does it cost to make each one on average? So that's our average total cost, which is just our total cost divided by the quantity. And we can also think of that as the two parts, fixed cost divided by the quantity and variable cost divided by the quantity. Okay, so if you want to know what's the typical one, then you're using the concept of average, right? But we have another concept, is how much will it cost to make one more? And that's actually a more relevant concept for most economic problems. So to make one more pizza. So what's the next one costing you? Because we really want to care about, or sometimes you see this, how much did the last one cost you? They're basically the same idea. And so this one is going to be, well, this is the idea of marginal cost. Oops, let me use red. This idea of marginal cost. And it's going to be, how much does the total cost change? This delta symbol means change, over how much does the quantity change? Okay, so if you think of this as the quantity change as being 1, so the interpretation is just is how much will it cost to make one more pizza. Okay, so if we think of this as being, well, this is 1, then this is our marginal cost of how much does our cost change. This is the idea. And this is actually very relevant, because if the customer wants to buy one more pizza and you want to think, well, how much should I sell it for? Well, this is actually more relevant than the average. How much will it cost you to make one more? If it costs you almost nothing, then that would be, you could sell it for cheaper. If it's going to cost you a lot of money, even higher, then you might not want to make it at all. They might not be willing to pay you enough to compensate you for it. Okay, so we're going to have we're going to go through an example using these two things. So let's go through this example, and it's going to be a numerical example. And I'm going to change this to a different color. Okay, so first we're going to have labor and quantity. So this right here is our production function. So the production function is and implicitly here we have capital, but let's suppose capital is just 1 unit. Okay, so I'm not going to write it, right? So we have capital, but it's fixed. So we're just going to do the labor. So we have implicitly here we have 1 unit of capital, like one building, and the machines inside. We'll just call it 1 unit of capital. But that is fixed here. Therefore, we're just going to ignore it. Okay. So we have our production function from our labor give us a certain quantity. Okay. So we have no labor, we get nothing, and we have 1 unit of labor, we get 60 pizzas, and 2 units of labor, we get 110, and 3 units of labor, we get 150, and 4 units of labor, we get 175, and 5, we get 185, and 6, we get 190. Okay, and just for fun, we can calculate our marginal product of labor, and we can discuss it. So we got 60 more, and then going from here to here, we get 50 more, and here to here, we get 40 more. And then 25 more, and 10 more, and 5 more. Okay. So our marginal product of labor does show diminishing returns. But just stop and look at it for a second, maybe pause. Does it show the gain from specialization in this case? Okay, so your answer should be that no, it does not. And the reason it does not, we don't have this point where marginal product of labor goes up, where the extra worker adds more than the one before it. And that's just because of an assumption I put into the problem. Okay, so I just kind of wanted to simplify the problem to focus on the other thing. Normally you would see that, in this case we don't see it. Okay, so then we can put our fixed cost. So we're going to assume that our fixed cost is 1,000. So maybe that's our rent, right? So our rent is 1,000. So 1,000. Okay, all the way down. You could just write. Okay, so that's our rent. So this is for our capital, but the capital is not changing. And then we have our variable cost. Okay, so our variable cost. We're gonna assume. I'll write down at the bottom. We're gonna assume that it's $200 per worker, that wage that they earn. Okay, so our variable cost is going to be 0. If we have no workers, there's no cost, and then it's going to go up 200, 400, 600, 800, and so on. Okay, and then we can get our total cost. So even if we produce nothing, we have a total cost of 1,000, and then we produce 60, we have a total cost of 1,200, and then we produce 110, and we have a total cost of 1,400, and so on. So notice the quantity is not necessarily going up evenly because each worker was not producing the same amount as the ones before. One thing I probably should have mentioned that you might be thinking about this marginal product labor, you're like, oh, it's caused, maybe some people might think it's caused because the later workers are not working as hard. But no, definitely not caused by that. So actually it's caused because the capital is limited and there's just not space or machines for them to use. So we just run into a limitation that for example, our oven capacity becomes our limiting factor. I'm going to stop the video and then I'll come back to finish calculations in the next one just so it doesn't get too long.